Greetings to all you trainers around the world, and welcome to Raising Ash, the show all about basics and fundamentals of the Pokemon trading card game, where we promote and guide along those new trainers in the PTCG world. And today we have a great show about supporters, and I want to take this time right now just to go ahead and take a look at all these supporters. Now what we're going to be looking at is just standard supporters, so anything in the standard edition that just went online about September 3rd we're looking at. So these are the ones I'm concerned about. We have a total of 31 supporters that you have to choose from, and what I'm going to go ahead and do is just run through these supporters, take a look at each one of them, sort of tell you about what they can do and what they can't do, what decks to run them with, and how to run them with. Now, I've had experience playing a lot of these supporters. I've played them over the last 3 years, most of them. Some of them have only been around really for maybe 9 months, and others have been around a lot longer than that. So it just depends on the supporter and what type of supporter it is. But we're going to start first by our first one, and that is the Ace Trainer. And this is a fairly new supporter. You can play this card only if you have more prize cards left than your opponent. Each player shuffle his or her hand into his deck, then draws 6. Your opponent draws 3 cards. So the idea behind the Ace Trainer, and it's sort of funny that I'm doing this all because I actually got asked by a father about this, and he talked to me almost 30 or 40 minutes about what supporters do and what supporters don't do. And so I thought, hey, maybe there's a lot of dads out there that just don't know, or a lot of moms out there that just don't know and want to get their children into the game, and they don't know what to buy or what they do or how to go about it. But let's just get right into it. I'm going to go right into this Ace Trainer. This is a fairly new supporter, and what this does is it actually limits your opponent hand size. So what you want to do is you want to play this Ace Trainer when your opponent has a big hand size, and then you play this card forcing your opponent to take a smaller hand size. Now you can only play this card if you have one more prize card left than your opponent. So that means your opponent actually you need to actually be losing to your opponent in prize card takes in order to play this opponent. So it's a very interesting card, but it is very hard to play because it puts you in a losing position. So do I tell parents to run 4 of these? I would say you run 1 of them and you want to use it as a tech card. And this is the bailout card. When you're losing the game, you play this card and it's going to force your opponent to draw 3. So moving right along, we have the big Archie's Ace in the Hole. You can play this card only when it's the last card in your hand. Now this is very hard to pull off, and the second effect here is put a water Pokemon from your discard pile into your bench, then draw 5 cards. Now I had some questions on this, on what type of Pokemon, where do the Pokemon go, and so forth. And it's really any Pokemon. So stage 1, stage 2, if it's in your discard pile, you can flip that Pokemon onto your bench. The problem is that it has to be the last card in your hand. So when this is the last card and you have not played any supporter for that turn, you can go ahead and play this card. It's actually pretty cool when you get this working. And matter of fact, if you look at the Worlds videos, Jacob Wagner, I believe that's his name, went ahead and played this card and was able to win Worlds with this card. It's a very tricky card. In standard version, it even gets more trickier because there's not item cards like computer search, there's not eggs, there's not different cards to go ahead and limit your hand size, sort of build your hand size up and build it down. But everybody right now in standard sort of trying to figure out how to play this card and what to do with it. We're going to move right along to AZ. AZ, put one of your Pokemon into your hand. Discard all cards attached to that Pokemon. So AZ is a pretty cool card, and what you want to play AZ with is Shaman. And basically what Shaman does is it allows you to draw more cards, or up to 6. So you basically can pull Shaman off your bench and then stick another Shaman down. Now the cool thing about AZ is that you are going to lose that cards, but if you're in a prize card war where you might actually be winning or losing and you might lose that Pokemon, you can AZ that Pokemon up and put it put it down. Now, a great effect to use this AZ with is a Bronzong deck, a Metal deck, or a Rayquaza deck. And what that allows you to do actually is you can actually AZ that Pokemon up and from your active position, and then go ahead and recharge them up with your Bronzong. It's pretty tricky to do, but when you get that supporter, it comes into great play. Now, again, I wouldn't suggest putting a 4-line of AZs. It's really a tech card. You really only have one of them. And going back, because I sort of missed Archie's ace in the hole on this one, you really only have 2 of them in your deck. You don't want to load your deck up with these types of cards because you are looking for certain type of draw support. So what we have here is Battle Reporter. Draw cards until you have the same number of cards in your hand as your opponent. Now, if you actually go to the Pokemon site and actually type in the words, if you actually were to go to the Pokemon site, hit the Pokemon database, you could actually type in the words draw cards, or same number of cards is actually a better search engine. When you draw those, certain Pokemon will come up. There's actually certain Pokemon that really do say that if you have a certain number of cards in your hand, the same number of cards as your opponent, you can go ahead and attack for a massive amount of damage. So this is how Battle Reporters is with those specific Pokemon that basically say the same number of cards in your hand as your opponent. So you can play Battle Reporter and get the same number of cards and then make that attack. Is this a great supporter? Some people feel like it's highly underused because people are always looking to draw cards from their supporter. I particularly don't run too many of Battle Reporters because I feel more confident with different supporters, and I feel like this is sort of maybe an underused supporter, but not necessarily a necessary supporter. Alright, so let's go ahead and move on. We have Blacksmith. Now, Blacksmith's really used in fire decks, and what we're going to look at is right here is attach 2 fire energy cards from your discard pile to one of your fire Pokemon. Now, that's sort of a big deal. It is a fire Pokemon that you have to attach, so if you're running a fire deck, this card is imperative to have in your deck. And what this is going to allow you to do is charge your Pokemon up faster. Now, charging your Pokemon up faster than your opponent does give you the edge for the most part and allows you to attack first, and that's why this is a big card. Now, again, this is for fire decks or when you are looking to attach energy to fire Pokemon. Again, when I am running fire decks, I could run anywhere between 3 and 4 of these. This is an imperative card to have in a fire deck. So let's just move on here to a Fossil Supporter. Now, Fossil Supporter, search your deck for up to 2 in any combination of Amora and Tyrant and put them onto your bench. Shuffle your deck afterwards. Now, Amora and Tyrant are pretty powerful Pokemon, but unfortunately, in order to get them out, you have to run a Fossil Searcher for their basic Pokemon. And so it becomes a little bit complicated to play. Now, in my research of this card, I find it very, very ambitious to play this with a lot of trainer males, a lot of acrobites. Because if you can pull this card on your first turn, it puts you in a very strong position to have these fossil cards out that are very powerful. Now, Aurorus, which is basically the stage evolution to Amora, I think is the better card than Tyrant. And Amora, basically, when you stage evolution, it basically gives all your water Pokemon less reduction. And that's huge. It gives you 20 less reduction in these stacks. So if you can imagine if you have 3 Amoras on your deck, and then you were able to stage evolution into Aurorus, it is absolutely huge because you just put a negative 60 on anybody's attack, as long as a water energy is attached to that Pokemon. So it becomes sort of a big play. Like I said, the best way to run this card is with trainer males and acrobites. You want to pull this card on your first turn. It's a little bit easier and expand it because you have Jirachi and computer search in order to do that. And in my testing, it actually works fairly well as long as you get this card out on first turn. If this goes into second turn, the match becomes very iffy on whether or not you're able to really do the damage you need to do, whether or not you're able to really get the reduction you really need. But yes, it's a very interesting card. There's some of my decks I only run 2 of these in, some of them I run 4 of them in. It just all depends on the deck and what you're trying to do with the deck. This pairs really well with Reg Ice. I've ran this pretty consistently with that Pokemon. If you pair Regice with Amora and Auroras, it runs pretty consistently with that Pokemon. Other Pokemons, it fares well, but I wouldn't say it's the necessary card you need in the deck. You might run 2 of them just to, if you can get it out, you can get it out. The best way to run a supporter is really to go all in on it. So my decks pretty much go all in on the supporter, and I run 4 of those. And again, it depends on the deck you're trying to build. So let's just move on to Hex Maniac. Until the end of your opponent's next turn, each Pokemon in play in each player's hand and in each player's discard pile has no abilities. This includes cards that came into play on that turn. Okay, so this is sort of really big. When a Pokemon doesn't, there's a lot of Pokemon that has abilities. So they have the ability and the effect under it. The effect could make you unable to attack Pokemon EX. It can make you item locked. There's all kinds of different effects. So being able to Hex Maniac and just shut down that ability for a turn is pretty huge. Hex Maniac is a pretty incredible card. The problem with it is that it's pretty situational, so it's hard to play. What I would suggest is running maybe one of these in the deck and sort of seeing how the deck folds. Now, of course, when you put a Hex Maniac into your deck, you limit the amount of draw support from your other cards. So you have to be very careful, and again, it's situational. Currently, right now, I haven't seen too many decks run the Hex Maniac at leagues, but as people become more and more reliant on the ability effects of Pokemon, Hex Maniac will start seeing play. I think right now it's a little early in the standard format for people to really start relying on Hex Maniac, but I could see people running this as maybe a one-off, as a tech card, in order to shut down those abilities so they can do what they need to do on their turn. So let's move on. We have Karina right here. Now, Karina is a pretty neat card. Search your deck for a fighting Pokemon and an item card. Reveal them and put them into your hand. Shuffle your deck afterwards. So what I like about Karina is that it gets you exactly what you need. And that's the most imperative thing in Pokemon, is getting what you need at the right time. So instead of just drawing a whole bunch of cards, Karina will get you the cards you need. So this is ran in fighting decks. And what you're trying to do is you're going to search for that fighting Pokemon, and then you also get an item. Now, an item could be anything. It could be what you need it at the time. It could be a spirit link. It could be a switch, an escape rope. So being able to pick that item for that specific turn is sort of imperative. I like Karina a lot. I've ran 4 Karinas. I've ran 3 Karinas. The drawback to Karina is it does slow down your deck, so you're not going to be able to run a lot of items at one time. What you're going to be able to run is that specific item you need, and that is a huge deal, is to be able to run that specific item you need. But sometimes you wish you had a couple more items that you could have. And the only way that you can do that is having a bigger draw support where you're going to draw out more cards. So Karina can be a tricky play. I like Karina. I could say that I've ran 3 or 4 in fighting decks. I would say it's one of the top cards because Pokemon can become very situational very quick. So let's move on to Lysander. Lysander, switch one of your opponent's bench Pokemon with his or her active Pokemon. Most commonly, Lysander has a minimum of 2 in every deck. And I will repeat that. There is a minimum of 2 Lysanders in every deck. It is a great card. It is a fantastic card. It is a situational card too, and mostly it's used at the end game. When you're running behind and you want to draw up that Pokemon to get that knockout, you're able to do that with Lysander. That's after you've put your bench you put your bench together, you got your setup going. All of a sudden you pull a Lysander, you're able to pick any Pokemon on the person's bench and draw them up and do the damage to knock them out if needed. I would say that in most decks you're looking at 2 Lysanders. I've seen as far as 3 Lysanders. Again, it depends on the deck, but minimum 2 Lysanders is what I've seen in every deck. So any type of deck you build, you should be looking for about 2 Lysanders. I've seen 1 or 2 decks run with 1 Lysanders. It gets a little tricky to run it with 1 Lysander. You get into situationals if it gets prized. So people tend to run 2 Lysanders in it, and it's probably one of the most heaviest played supporter cards out there. So what we have next is Maxie's Hidden Ball Trick. Now Maxie's Hidden Ball Tricks is a lot like Archie's Ace in the Hole. You can play this card only when its last card is in your hand. Put a fighting Pokemon from your discard pile onto your bench, then draw 5 cards. Now I gotta admit, I think Archie's Ace in a Hole has a little bit more variety in Expanded to play, but Maxie Hidden Ball does have a couple of Pokemon it can pull out. One of the most biggest Pokemon is Archelops in Expanded, but in Standard, people are still trying to figure out how to work this card out. I would say it's pretty difficult to play. You can play this card only when it's your last card in your hand. People are trying to figure out how to discard cards in order to get this to be the last card in their hand. Put a fighting Pokemon from your discard pile onto your bench, then draw 5 cards. That's a great effect, but again, you have to discard those cards. Most people stick with Karina, and the reason why they stick with Karina is because if you're running a stage evolution, you can literally cut out the stage 1 cards and just run Rare Candy. And a Karina allows you to pick that fighting Pokemon and an item. Rare Candy is an item. So you can actually take a Rare Candy, evolve into your Machamp, your stage 2 pretty quickly if you have them on your bench. So between the two, I would say Karina's probably your better play than Maxie's Hidden Ball Trick as of now. As the season goes on, there might be some more support for Maxie's Hidden Ball Trick, but as of now, it's pretty tough to play. Let's go ahead and hit the next card. So the next card we have is Pokemon Central Lady. Okay, so Pokemon Central Lady says heal 60 damage and remove all special conditions from one of your Pokemon. This is pretty big. It can be used. Now, when you use Pokemon Central Lady, the problem is that you're a supporter, so you cannot draw any more cards. This can be used with Shaman, and it works out pretty well if you're drawing support from Chaining, Ultra Balling out, playing Shaman as your Pokemon in order to draw support, and then playing Pokemon Central Lady to heal. I prefer more draw support, so I rarely run Pokemon Central Ladies. Once in a while I might run 1 or 2, but it just depends on the deck. I would suggest that getting the draw support is a bigger deal than healing your Pokemon. So most decks run fast and hard, where they're going to hit you hard and they're going to be very fast when they hit you. In this scenario, you're healing, you're not running fast and hard, you're trying to sort of outlast your opponent. And because so many decks can hit for weakness and just do so much massive amounts of damage, it's really, really hard to pull off when you're doing Pokemon Central Lady, where she's only going to hit for 60 damage. And though she's going to remove the special conditions, there's stuff like Rough Seas as a stadium card out there that the special conditions don't matter as much when you're getting poisoned or confused on a hit. But yes, it is played. It's played as a one-off. And matter of fact, in last year's World, I thought it was the biggest surprise card I ever saw, because I saw more people run Pokemon Central Lady or the PCL than I saw any other card for their supporters. That's what I thought interesting. Some decks even pulled out 2 of them. So again, most decks run fast and hard. I would suggest maybe 1, 2 of those in a deck at max. Alright, Pokemon Fan Club. Now, Pokemon Fan Club is an interesting card. You're going to search your deck for up to 2 basic Pokemon, reveal them, and put them into your hand. Shuffle your deck afterwards. Now, this card was basically in the XY, and it really does well with the fairy decks. Aromatisse, you can Pokemon Fan Club for Aromatisse. Get her out on your bench, and then just go ahead and start evolving, getting that energy moved around wherever you need it. So I think it's a bigger play now than it was before, because not only can you run it with those fairy decks as of course, but you can pull a shaman now. A shaman's a basic Pokemon, and it's going to get you more draw support. So you have the opportunity of getting not only the basic Pokemon you need, because you're going to be able to draw 2 of them, but a card that will be able to draw you draw support. You put those cards on your bench, you draw another 6 up, and you have more draw support there. So I think that in time that this Pokemon will be used even more greatly because of that. For now, I would say maybe 2 of them I see in most competitive decks. That's the most I've ever seen in competitive decks. And the reason again why is because even though you can get that draw support, there are times where your shaman just isn't working because, hey, basically you have too many cards in your hand and you didn't draw those Ultra Balls. So you're really scrambling to get your deck down so you could draw more support. So Pokemon Fan Club is an interesting card. I would suggest maybe 1 or 2 of them if you're going to build a deck. I don't suggest running a 4-line of these. There's very few supporters you want to run a 4-line of them. But as we come up on Birches, this could be possibly a 4-line of them. So you got shuffle your hand into your deck and flip a coin. If heads, draw 7 cards. If tails, draw 4 cards. Now, Professor Birch's observation can be impressive because if you hit heads, you're going to draw 7 cards. Now, that's a major draw in any type of Pokemon. You did not have to basically sycamore away your hand. You get to just draw from your deck. You shuffle it in, you draw 7. Now, 7's a massive amount of cards and a lot of things you can do with 7. So having that heads is a big deal. Now, if tails, you draw 4. 4 cards isn't too bad. On your next turn, remember, you're going to draw a card, so you're going to have 5 cards in your hand. Ashana draws 5. So Professor Birch's observation is a pretty good card to go with. I've seen people run anywhere between 3 and 4 of Professor Birch's observation. It can be an impressive card when it hits that heads. Again, there's other cards out there that you can use, but I see more people relying on the Birch's observation than they are relying on other cards. And a lot of the reason why is because of the stadium wars and keeping those stadiums in your deck. If you discard a lot of your stadiums, it can almost lead you to an auto loss. So it's sort of a big deal to keep those cards into your deck sometimes. Alright, so let's go ahead and move on to Sycamore. Now, Sycamore is the 4-line. It is the major card. There is no other card out there that gets played more heavier in Standard than Professor Sycamore. So what does this card do? This card, discard your hand and draw 7 cards. This card is massive. So what do I tell parents? I tell parents to go out and buy 4 of these cards for any deck. You can run up to 4. And the hardest thing about Pokemon is that a lot of times you need to discard your hand in order to get the cards you need. So this automatically draws you 7. So, you're working with, 60 cards in a deck. You draw out 7 cards. You have 53. So you want to thin that deck down a little bit so you can get the cards you want. So if you get a bad hand right off the bat and you have a Sycamore in your hand, you can just discard that hand, trash it, and pick up another hand. Now, I always tell parents you need to buy 4 of these cards. Professor Birches is the same way. You need to have 4 of the Professor Birches in order to really use these cards properly. In any deck, you will probably be having these minimum 3, maximum 4. So Professor Sycamore is a card that you will need to get. It's a pretty cheap card. You can buy 4 of them. I think they're running for $1.50. So like I said, reasonable card to buy. You can pick them up on eBay or Amazon, and you will have that deck for your son so that he can discard those cards and get the cards he needs, or for your daughter. So what we have right now is Shauna, and Shauna in Standard is becoming the more practical use. People are sometimes choosing it over to Birches. Now, I like to run a little fast and wild, so I don't mind Birches. I think over time you actually hit more heads than you do tails with Birches. But there's always the steady Pokemon players out there. And the steady Pokemon players like Shauna. You're going to shuffle your hand into your deck, then draw 5 cards. Now, that's a pretty neat card, because what that's going to allow you to do is sort of trash your hand, but you're not discarding your whole hand. You're just putting it back into your deck, and you're going to draw 5 more cards. Now, sometimes thinning your deck out with Sycamore is a better play, but you can always do that, draw 5 cards, and see what else comes up. This is what I call the steady rock card. It is a steady card. It can get you what you need, but it is not fast and wild like your Sycamore, like your Birches, where it will get you what you need for the most part, most of the time. Shauna is sort of, to me, almost sometimes can feel like, a devilish play. Like, when I'm reaching for cards, I will reach for a Birches or a Sycamore before I reach for a Shauna. So how many do you need in a deck? I've seen people run up to 4 of them in a deck. I've seen people run up to 3 of them. Is it a good card? Yes, it is a good card to have. Do you need to overload your deck with it? Possibly, depending on the type of player you are. If you like sort of the steady go player where you're going to draw those 5 cards and you feel good about that, and that's going to add consistency to the deck, then you're good. If you feel like a little bit more of a Wild West type of player, which I play like, I like the flips, I like discarding, and I like just getting the cards I need as fast as I can. So I generally don't run a lot of Shaunas in it. In my deck, sometimes I do a 1 or 2 off, but I've seen other players run up to 4, and I've seen it work out for them. So that's Shauna, and let's go on and move on to our next card here. Now we have a Steven. Now Steven, search your deck for a supporter card and a basic energy card. Reveal them and put them into your hand. Shuffle your deck afterwards. Steven's a really interesting card. And the reason why Steven's an interesting card is because it allows you to draw your energies. Most times, when you're Sycamoring, or when you're Shawning, or when you're Professor Birchesing, literally, what you need is an energy card. You need an energy card, and on your next turn, you need a supporter. So, Steven, you're going to blow your supporter on it, but you're going to get that energy you need on the card. Now, Steven has seen some play. It's not a big card, but I've seen decks use 2 of these in most decks. Do I say go out and buy this? I would say probably your most important cards in order to buy are your Shaunas, your Sycamores, and your birches if you're looking at supporters. Those are really, really important cards to have in your deck. Steven is pretty much, once you get those cards, you can get a Steven. You can add in different supporters and try and do different things. So this is sort of a supporter card for the supporters. And I would suggest, take a look at it, see your deck. If you have those cards I've already suggested, then go out and get yourself a Steven and see how it runs. It's a pretty reasonable card. You can buy like 4 of these cards for $1. Now I'm showing you full arts on some of these, but the regular cards are a lot cheaper. Now let's go ahead and move on to Teammates. Teammates in standard version is seeing a lot more play. So you can play this card only if one of your Pokemon was knocked out during your opponent's last turn. Search your deck for up to 2 cards. Put them into your hand and shuffle your deck afterwards. Are you kidding me? 2 cards is huge. Being able, situational, to pull those 2 cards out is absolutely massive. So you can pull your DCE, your Muscle Band, attach them on that turn. It is a massive, massive card to play. Now, it is a situational card. It is meant for decks that are playing cards that will probably be knocked out. They're playing the prize card exchange. So decks like a Vespiquen deck where it only has 90 HP and you're going to get knocked out. So your next turn you're going to be able to play that card, get your Muscle Band, get your DCE, attach them to your next Vespiquen. So that's the way you want to play this card. You actually want to play this card for lower level HP decks. Higher level HP decks, it becomes a little trickier because you're going to have to maybe play it on the next round or the next round after, and then it turns into what we call a situational card. And sometimes a situational card doesn't really work out for that specific situational. I know that sounds confusing, but once you start playing, you will see that it can come in handy at the right time if the right time is happening. So let's go ahead and move on to Teammates. Again, I would say if you want to pick up this card, you can. I would probably say to any parents that are listening out there that the Professor Sycamores and the Birches are the more imperative cards, and the Shaunas, again, are the more imperative cards to have out there. And if your child is very into fighting Pokemon, it's definitely the Karina card that you want for those fighting Pokemon. So cards like Lucario, which children love to play, Lucario EX, that's where you want to use those Karinas. Now we have another card, and I'm seeing a lot more of this card. It's a Teruno. Draw 3 cards. Because we're going into a season without a ton of draw support from our supporters. Our supporters are almost becoming situational supporters. What we are now seeing is Teruno. Teruno is draw 3 cards. So you literally peel 3 cards off the top of your deck and see what you get. Now, I prefer the Birches. I prefer the Sycamores. The Terunos to me are a little risky. I don't think 3 cards is deep enough into the deck to really get you what you need at the right time. I feel like you're better off than going for a situational card like a Teammates if that's what you want to do, or a Pokemon Fan Club to get that situational card out. So again, like I said, the Shaunas, the Sycamores, the Professor Birches are really the top cards that you want to start out with when you're building your child's deck. So we're going to move on to Wally, and Wally has a great little synopsis here that is just massive. So search your deck for a card that evolves from one of your Pokemon, excluding Pokemon EX, and put it onto that Pokemon. This counts as evolving that Pokemon. Shuffle your deck afterward. You can use this card during your first turn or on a Pokemon that was put in play this turn. So that is sort of massive To me, it's a situational card, but what this allows you to do is evolve immediately. In other words, when you evolve, you have to wait a turn. So you play your basic Pokemon on that turn, and then after you've done all your actions, you have to end your turn. On the next turn, you can evolve. What Wally allows you to do is actually play Wally and evolve on that turn. Now, you cannot evolve into any megas. There's no way you can hit the megas, unfortunately. So this is really for those non-Pokemon EX cards. And so you can evolve into your Raichus and your Bronzons on that turn in order to make this card happen. I feel like this is a situational card. If you're just starting out in the game, I feel those other cards I mentioned are way more important to have. I feel Wally is a 1 or 2 off that can really do a deck. Now, again, it depends on the type of deck. If you're the type of deck that really wants to item lock your opponent first round no matter what, you want to go into that Trevenant, you could see people run a 4 off into this. Now, that's a pretty advanced deck to do. For children, I would suggest look for draw support. And that's the type of supporters I would suggest with those. So let's go ahead and move on. And what we have now is Winona. Now, Winona's a pretty trick card. I love it. It's tricked out. It's pretty nice. So search your deck for up to 3-star Pokemon. Reveal them and put them into your hand. Shuffle your deck afterwards. Now, that is massive 3-star Pokemon. So what you have going on right now is 3-star Pokemon. So if you were to look at the different types of Pokemon that are out there, and you were to look at the star Pokemon, you would notice that one of the major Pokemons is Shaman, which will get you draw support, and Rayquaza, which will do a massive amount of damage if your bench is full. So this card can really come in handy for star Pokemon decks where you're concentrating on getting star Pokemons out there and doing that type of draw support. So if your son has a colorless, what they call colorless Pokemon, and it's a Rayquaza, and he wants to build that Rayquaza deck, I would suggest getting a Winona in there. I've seen players run up to 4 Winonas in the actual Rayquaza deck. Now, personally, I run up to 2 Winonas. I prefer the draw support, but when you're running that Rayquaza deck, most of your draw support's actually coming from that Shaman Pokemon that's going to give you the draw support because of its ability and the effect of that ability. But yeah, Winona can be very important if you're running that type of deck. Again, I feel like the Shauna Sycamore and Professor Birches is a better play as young players starting out. Now we have the Zero Sick. Choose a Pokemon tool or special energy card attached to a Pokemon in play, yours or your opponent's, and discard it. So that's sort of a big deal. Being able to discard a tool is a big deal. Being able to discard a special energy is a big deal. It can actually put opponents pretty far behind and make them scramble a bit, make them discard cards and try and get different things onto the actual bench there. So, when a deck you're playing against uses a lot of special energy, this Zero Sick comes in real handy. When there's, let's say, a Primal Kyogre or something that wants to evolve from a Spirit Link, pulling that tool card and forcing them to end their turn can come into real handy. Now, Zero Sick, downfalls of Zero Sick. Basically, if you run more than 2 of these in your deck, you slow your draw support down. I suggest you run 1 of these maybe in a deck in order for you to pull those tool cards and those special cards. What you're trying to do is just slow your opponent down for that round, for that turn, and once you slow them down for that turn, you can go ahead and attack them the next turn, put them in what we call an awkward position. If you run more than these, more than one of them really, you start slowing down your deck massively. And once you start slowing down your deck massively, it gives your opponent time to build his deck up and put the cards he needs on the floor faster. And once that happens, Zero Sick becomes obsolete. It really is one of those cards where you can slow your opponent down quickly on a turn or two when you're running behind. It's a situational card. I would suggest again that if your son is into disrupting or your daughter is into disrupting hands, where they're playing hands where they want to, take tool cards off, discard energy from different Pokemon, and I got to admit, these are not my favorite decks to play with. This is not the type of decks I like to play either. I like to strategize against my opponent and try and sort of figure out what he's doing and sort of let the best man win in those scenarios. But in what we call locked decks, this becomes very important. And even in not locked decks, it also can be played in regular standard deck as just a card that will throw your opponent for a loop. It just puts them in an awkward position and makes them scramble for their next special energy or their tool card. And that's really how you're supposed to use that supporter. So, here we go now. We have a 31 trainers, and these are trainers, and 31 supporters of those. Each of them are giving a name of what type of card now. Again, my top picks as somebody coming into the game are these. You want to have your child to have Shauna's, Professor Sycamore's, Birch's, and the Lysander. So these are my top picks for supporters. As your child becomes more accustomed to playing Pokemon and starts picking the type of Pokemon he prefers to play with, you can start drawing in different supporters like the Winonas if he's interested in colors, the Blacksmith if he's interested in fire types, the Archie's Ace in the Hole for water types. Again, I think having a one-off of an ace trainer will be exceptionally good for this format. However, I don't think you need 4 of them, maybe 1 of them, just to have for the format. Now, those are my top picks of supporters. Please comment, give me feedback on what your top picks of supporters are and what you think maybe a basic or a new person coming into the PTCG world would be interested. I'd love to hear it, so post your comments. This is Raising Ash out. Have a great evening, day, or wherever you are, whatever time it is. Take care.